This week, Kumar and Emmet discuss a new book from our friends at Avery Hill Publishing, a comics adaptation of Shakespeare's Macbeth by Kate Briggs. We hope you'll spread the word about deconstructing comics, tell your friends about us, share episodes on social media, and also send us suggestions for topics we could cover. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com.
This is Kumar.
And this is Emmet.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Kumar and Emmet in Melbourne and various regional or suburban locations. We're here to talk about Macbeth, adapted by Catherine Briggs, signed as K. Briggs on the cover, but Catherine Briggs on the inside. Now, you already owned this book, a physical copy of this book.
Yes. So this is a book from Avery Hill.
Okay.
And this podcast, we've been very lucky with Avery Hill in terms of the books we reviewed from them. So I am a fan.
Okay.
For those listening, we've previously reviewed Katrina Chapman's Breakwater. I believe you and I talked about Lights, Planets, People by Molly Naylor. And
no, we did 2120.
And I was just going to get to George Wallace's 2120. Maybe that was Tim I was thinking of. So there's a collection of excellent books. And so I've signed up to their Kickstarters.
Okay.
And I got this beautiful edition of Macbeth by Kate Briggs. Briggs uses she, they pronouns.
Okay.
So just be mindful of that. And their website is Catherine, spelled Kathyryne, Briggs, BRIGGS.com. It's a gorgeous looking website, actually. And they've got some really interesting work on there. This, I did not know what to expect. I just, once you and I decided we're going to do this, I cracked it open and was immediately floored by it. So
it's a real visual feast. We'll get to all that stuff, but first of all, do we need to explain what Macbeth is to people? What's your relationship with Shakespeare and Macbeth? How do you feel about this stuff in general?
So I came up through the Irish education system. So a Shakespeare play is de rigueur with our exams. So we've got two major secondary school, which would be high school in this country, exams. They're called the Junior Cert and the Leaving Cert. And there's always a play that you have to study. Mm-hmm. And I was assigned two plays, Julius Caesar for my Junior Cert and Othello for my Leaving Cert.
Okay.
And what you do is you spend the year before studying those plays and reading up in Shakespeare and reading up the Shakespearean language and watching all the films, all the adaptations. That's the cheat code for a lot of people. My dad was a teacher, and he sort of was trying to get a feeler on what Shakespearean play the Junior Cert year was going to be assigned the year I did the Junior Cert. And some wag told him Macbeth. Mm-hmm. So before the official announcement. So I spent an entire summer just reading Macbeth.
Okay.
And I watched that terrible Polanski movie. Roman Polanski made a Macbeth movie. I don't know.
I have a story about that movie as well coming up.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
And so it was all Macbeth. And then the announcement came out, it's Julius Caesar. And I was like, scrap all that. Let's get some Marlon Brando into this household. I read Julius Caesar, which is a less interesting play. I did end up reading a lot of Shakespeare because of that educational background, and it's something I've circled back to a lot. I think, if you're of a certain age, you probably remember Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet, mm-hmm. where he had the sort of unexpurgated text, like the whole text.
Yeah.
Kate Briggs has attempted something very similar here. It's the entire text. I've seen Shakespeare on stage a number of different times. One of my favorite productions was a production of Othello, where it was a black director, and they chose to have Iago played by a black actor.
Okay.
Which kind of
Yep.
teased out a different meaning
Yes.
from the typical blackface version of Othello. So I remember from an early age sort of being exposed to this idea of Shakespeare is so fundamental. I think we're going to get into this here. Shakespeare is so fundamental in our sort of English language cultural understanding. Now is the time to actually start teasing at those fundamental pillars and like replacing aspects and seeing what other meanings we can tease out of these texts, because over the centuries there's become these received understandings of what these plays are about, and the trap there is that, well, our social values and our mores and all that have become so distanced from the time in which these plays are performed. How can we legitimately assume we are experiencing what the audience is in those times?
I think, and I also think the language has become so distant too. I think that's a big component of it, which I kind of surprised me. I don't think I've read the original version of Macbeth since high school. So for me, it was Midsummer Night's Dream in grade 10, and then Romeo and Juliet in grade 11, and Macbeth in grade 12.
Oh, so you actually got to study it.
Yeah. And, of course, I did an English degree, 2 English degrees in university, so I read a bunch of them, but I don't remember actually coming back to Macbeth in any of those university courses. I think they were all histories or something like that, or somehow I don't remember ever coming back to it after high school. However, it was kind of the one that I liked a bit more because there was a kind of a cult element, just that side of it I appreciated, or maybe I was able to latch onto it a little bit more than the other plays that I did. But the Macbeth story I have is that while we were doing it in grade 12, the teacher rolled in a TV and VCR into the classroom so we could watch the Plancy Macbeth, and the TV and VCR were in the classroom for a few days, and somebody brought in Terminator 2, and we started watching that one day, and the teacher came in, and she was very angry about it, was calling it violent trash, blah, 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 and we were like, we just watched the Plancy Macbeth, which is a gore fest, and it was so hypocritical, and it kind of blew up into this minor blow up, and there was like stuff about it in the school newspaper and stuff like
brilliant.
that. So that was kind of my connection to it, and that was kind of it. So coming in this time, and also, I have to say I'm out of practice. I think you have to be in practice of reading the language, because coming into it, I found it it was very hard for me to follow without footnotes. I need like footnotes on the same page or facing page so I can understand a lot. I ended up going to Wikipedia. I had to reread a summary to try to figure out what was happening in certain scenes in this. Because I feel like I'm out of practice. I feel like if it was, 20 years ago, I would have read it no problem. Or, well, I don't know, not about no problem, but it would have been a lot smoother because my reading aptitude for Shakespeare was pretty good at a certain stage of my life. But I do feel like it's like a different language at this stage, and since I'm out of practice, it's kind of gone.
Yeah.
But as you said,
that's kind of what I love about Briggs's approach, because I feel like they've introduced this. It's light hitting a prism for me.
That's a good way of putting it.
Okay, so the language is the prism, and the light is, of course, the artistic approach, and then it creates this shattering spectrum.
Yeah.
From that, because the language is so hard, it's this hard surface, and then you get refracted off that, and Briggs's interpretation goes in all these different directions. So the language is there as this sort of core, and then everything else is around, emanating out from it. And I just love that. And then the pages, the breakdowns, and the symbolism, and this sort of visual digressions that Briggs introduces. The language is there. That's the solid thing. Yeah. Everything else is like psychological, mystical, visionary. It's a beautiful approach.
Oh yeah, I mean it's so striking and stunning, and there's no consistent singular artistic approach. There's all sorts of stuff going on here. There's stuff that looks like woodcuts. There's stuff that you got the Dymo labeling tape for text on some sections. Some of it looks like watercolor. Some looks like it was done in crayons. But the other thing is, it's visually, a lot of it is kind of abstract. Or they've taken a symbolic approach to how to represent somebody's state of mind or a scene. Yep. So if you don't know the text and you come into an abstract image, you're going to be double lost. I think you really need to know you know what I mean? Like if you got something so if you don't have a very literal, this is not a very literal representation visually.
No.
And it's definitely not for, a lot of these adaptations that we get these days, graphic novel adaptations of Shakespeare, are very literal, and they're there for high school kids to cheat with. They're your Cliff Notes in comic book form, essentially. This is not that at all. This is a deep dive. This is, no high school student is going to read this and be able to cheat on their Macbeth exam.
No. But, the expectation is, okay, look, I think that's fair to say there's an expectation of some familiarity with the text. And if not that, some familiarity with the imagery that Briggs is using.
Yes.
And the source of inspiration. So there's this famous passage, the Lady Macbeth soliloquy, where, which I remember a lot of feminist critique of Macbeth is that Lady Macbeth is this shrewish character, and I think there's a lot of interesting stuff with gender in this adaptation as well, which we could maybe touch on.
Yes.
But with Lady Macbeth, her villainy is, in certain people's interpretation, essentially feminine. Like it's her not being a man. That's what makes her villainous, and then Macbeth is her agent almost. So there is let's see here. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here, and fill me from the crown to the toe top, full of direst cruelty. Make thick my blood, stop the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious visitage of nature shake my fell purpose, no keep peace between the effect and I. Come to my woman's breasts and take my milk for gall, you murthering ministers, wherever in your sightless substances you wait on nature's mischief. And yes, it's this idea of make me not a man.
Yes. Yeah.
Briggs interprets this with this visual vivisection of Lady Macbeth, exposing her chest, exposing the skeletal structure, exposing her heart, which is what the language is in reference to. But this deconstruction of her femininity is what's happening here. So it's not that Lady Macbeth is villainous. It's that there's this societal expectation that the woman do not take action. Like she has, in order for her to do this, she's saying, make me more like a man. But it's this dialogue with that societal expectation of male force versus female passivity. And Lady Macbeth is certainly not passive. She's a very active character.
Yes. But what does unsex me mean in this universe that Catherine Briggs has created, the Macbeth universe of Catherine Briggs? Because Briggs has blind casted a number of characters. So Malcolm is a black woman in this one. And she is a warrior who basically is standing victorious on the battlefield at the end of the comic. And I'm like, wait a second. So this is what women are like in this world. So why does Lady Macbeth think she needs to be unsexed? If women are out there on the battlefield as much as the men are, let's say. Yeah. So there's I don't know if it's a conflict or a contradiction or what you want to call it, but there's something weird going on there.
Yeah, it's a deliberate juxtaposition, and both of Duncan's sons are referred to as sons, and they are called sons, but they are women.
Did Briggs change any of the pronouns to he's or she's or anything? Do you know if Did you notice anything?
I did notice at certain points they talked about lady. They addressed certain characters as lady, but then they talked about them as sons.
Okay.
And, young Seward is also visually a woman.
Okay.
Whereas in the play, he's sort of like a callow youth who faces Macbeth and comes to a bad end. And there's a number of other characters who are also gender swapped. I don't think that takes away from the Lady Macbeth speech, because there's still this role of gender at work within the story. But the characters themselves visually present differently. And race is the other aspect too. Like, they're racially more diverse than a typical presentation of Macbeth. And we're straying into that same area where I remember there was a production of Henry V where Fiona Shaw played the title character. Mm-hmm. So it's unspoken, it's not unremarked upon. It's simply there.
Yeah,
it's there to sort of, again, as I was saying to you at the start of this conversation, it's that teasing out of the meaning when you change the fundamental aspects, and like, does this change your understanding of what's happening? If the presentation of gender, if the presentation of race is altered, does that change the meaning of the text? And does it take away some of those certainties, which I think we now, because Shakespeare is so rarefied, you have certain cultural values getting reinforced, and this contradicts that and goes, well, no, let's look at this again.
Right.
What's happening here?
Right. I think that with the gender, switching genders of characters, that made you really rethink some of the lines. But because this is an Othello, changing the races of characters didn't have any palpable effect. But I did think, what if Briggs had made like all of the English people black and all the Scottish people white, or vice versa, or something?
Sure.
Then you would have had some kind of message of some sort. Right? But I think the way it is now, it's just, I don't know. It's not I'm not saying it's pointless. I'm saying it's not distracting.
Yeah. I don't like the term blind casting. Mm-hmm. I don't like that idea, because I think it plays into this idea of, they're rewriting history. And the version of history that's being rewritten is the version of history where Europe was apparently white from Sicily up to Oslo. Like, it's just a white as far as I can see. It's like that line for the producers, white is the color of our carpet, that is not what Europe was like. Europe was very ethnically diverse, very racially diverse. And the example I always drop is that there's this sense that Ireland was this remote island community full of white people who kept marrying their cousins or something. But we have words in our language for people of different ethnicities. We have language for people with dark skin, for people with different colored skin. We actually were clearly interacting with other cultures. And there was trade, and there was travel, and there was all this toing and froing across the continent and beyond. So I never am comfortable with this version of history, which is like, well, everyone was white, and then, I don't know, Marco Polo and Columbus met some other people, and but they stayed over there. So I like it. I like its use here because it doesn't bring me up short too much. And it actually reminds me a lot of what it's like to live in Scotland today.
Right.
I feel like you could have a contemporary Scottish production of this, and you could just cast from Scottish actors currently out there, and you would probably get a cast that looks like this. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's an interesting choice all the same, and it sort of does frustrate that sort of monocultural, gendered Shakespearean tradition. And again, it throws Lady Macbeth into some relief that she's not the only woman here.
Yeah. Do you think there's possibly another reading of it also where the sons, who are women, are actors playing male roles in the way that literal Shakespearean theater would have been all a male cast playing every role?
That's an interesting idea.
Possibility?
It's an interesting idea. I mean, I think what brings me up short on that is the depiction of Macbeth himself. Macbeth, I love how Macbeth looks in this, because Macbeth is such a schlubby dude. He's this sort of balding, gormless looking guy, That was the first thing I saw. I opened up the book and I looked at the cast of characters pages, which is a beautiful heraldic presentation of the different characters. And Macbeth, I was like, oh, he's got like no hair and he's got like shitty stubble and he's got a weak chin and a pokey nose. And yeah, he looks like a guy. He
looks malleable.
He looks like he's had too many beers, too many nights in the local for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the first thing I saw, and it was the first thing I immediately loved, because I was just going, yeah, he's just a dude. Whereas they usually like to depict him as being somewhat attractive and driven and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, what's your definition of tragedy? How far do you have to fall? This guy seems like maybe he didn't fall that far, because I didn't remember the play, but coming into it, Macbeth is convinced very easily. Like, oh, I'm going to be king? Okay, I better try to be king. Like, there's no... Well, there is some second guessing of himself. Should I do this? Shouldn't I? It's all there, and the hallucination of the dagger, all that stuff is there, but I think you're right. The way Briggs has depicted him as a bit of a milquetoast, maybe, visually. It seems like this version of Macbeth isn't falling as far as a heroic, handsome Macbeth might be falling.
Yeah, I mean, one of the more recent cinematic portrayals of Macbeth was played by Michael Fassbender, a legitimately attractive man.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I think this is the opposite of that. This is as far from Michael Fassbender.
Yeah, didn't we have Denzel as well?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Another recent production. Yes, you're right. Sorry. More recent. It was the Coen brothers, I believe.
I think it was one of the Coens. I don't think it was both. It was some weird... I haven't seen it.
Coming up, more discussion of this graphic novel take on Macbeth. But first, a reminder to join us for 20th Century TV and music trivia quiz videos and more on our Patreon page. Every month, patrons donating $4 a month or more also get a full-length podcast episode reviewing an issue of The Amazing Spider-Man from the 1960s. Check out all our rewards at patreon.com/deconcomics. If you'd rather give a one-time donation, you can do so via PayPal by sending it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
Greetings from Wayne Manor Memoirs, a podcast dedicated to exploring the Batman mythos.
Each episode, we research a character, story, contributor, or piece of pop culture related or adjacent to the Dark Knight,
and try to understand why these topics are important to the Bat mythos. I'm Joe.
I'm Kendall, and some of our favorite topics include the transformation of Mr. Zero into Mr. Freeze,
the early appearances of the Riddler,
Booster Gold,
Commandi,
Jim Aparo,
and many, many more. Check out Wayne Manor Memoirs every other Friday, wherever you download your podcasts.
And follow us at Wayne Manor Memoirs on Facebook or at W Memoirs on Twitter.
Until next time, Bat Fanatics, be brave
and stay bold.
Yes, but then we've got Banquo and Macduff, who have almost the same hip haircut, which confused me in some moments. Their beards are, I guess, what kind of, and their noses, if you look really close enough. Yeah, so we got to, I kind of wish I'd had the physical copy like you have. I got this PDF from the publisher, but there are pages that look like they're photographed, like they're cutouts. It really, I don't know, on PDF it really looks like there's another page under there. I know that there's no die-cut pages in there, right?
Well, no, there's nothing like that. I was wondering if because you interviewed Gary Spencer Millage, didn't you?
Yes.
I wondered if you maybe saw a comparison with him as well in terms of the sort of photorealist painterly approach, like in Strangehaven and so forth.
Yeah, well, I didn't see it as photorealistic. I think they've, I don't know, because I think there's reference. There's maybe model reference, especially I'm looking at this page with the witches now, and they've all got such distinct faces. But there is a cartooniness about it in the sense that sometimes I was dependent on the dialogue to tell which person it was in some scenes, like who's talking, who's in this scene. it's not really obsessively photo reference or photorealistic. I wouldn't call it photorealistic at all. I'm really interested in the collage pages as well. You haven't really mentioned those.
Yeah, that's what I was holding up to the. So this is the picture of the page of the three witches,
yes,
and then you've got this text.
It's like drawn over a textbook or something.
Yeah, this collage effect, and yeah, it's quite beautiful actually. I really like the impact of it. I really like this sort of sense of. I'm pretty sure I've dropped this reference on a previous episode, but there's a movie called Walker by Alex Cox, which is all about this absolute dickhead who invaded South America on spurious reasons, profiteering and so forth, all in the name of spreading freedom and democracy. But there are certain scenes in Walker where Ed Harris will do something or something happens, and then a modern element will intrude in the scene.
Ah, okay.
So they'll be walking down the road, and then a sports car will go speeding past, and no one will comment on it,
right.
Or characters will be drinking out of Coke cans, and it's almost as if the things you're doing are manifesting this future state.
Mm.
It's coming now. This future is now being locked in because of the atrocities that Walker's committing in that time period. And I feel like there was a similar aspect here where some of the collage, or is it bricolage? I can never tell. Seems to be actuated by, well, we're talking about the line of kings that's been established here.
Yeah.
And that's sort of kicking in with Macbeth and Banquo's fate. That's sort of being manifested. And we then see some of those modern elements, typically background elements to a page, suddenly appear.
Mm.
And that's not even getting into the tarot of it all. But yes, there's the contrasting of the characters with these dreamlike sort of layouts and sequences, and then introducing other media into the page also sets off your understanding of what's happening.
Mm.
And then you start thinking about how this connects to the present day, or how this connects to this tradition, or how this might be have some sort of occult significance. Why are we using that particular tarot representation of this character? Right. What does that mean? That sort of that layering of meanings starts kicking in.
Yes, but some of them, like very near to the end, somebody mentions "Thy kingdom's pearl," and I think pearl means like, is it the people? But Briggs has photographed actual pearls and put them on the page. It's like very literal. I don't know if it's a correct interpretation of what Thy Kingdom's Pearl is, but that was like only a minor. Like every page in this book is an explosion of like representation of how are we going to represent this artistically, and you can't expect every thing to work or to hit exactly right. So there's a moment like that with the pearls. I was like, is this supposed to be literal pearls? But it was such a tour de force. So very hard to read in one sitting because there was so much going on. I found it was so overwhelming, not in a negative way.
Yeah.
But I had to slow down and take a break and go do something else and come back to it. In fact, I kind of felt like if you, as I said before, I think you need to be familiar with the play to get the most out of it. But also, if you're familiar with the play, you could kind of dip into this book and just pick out scenes or moments, any random moment, and kind of get there, because it's going to be visually distinct from everything else anyway. It's kind of its own unit.
Yeah, I like that idea, because again, that does also speak to the idea of tarot too, which is that you reflect on the image and you sort of orient yourself to the representation on the card in that particular moment. And you could sort of have this other vector into the Macbeth play through this comic in a similar way, where you're coming in from a completely different angle, and then you sort of have a different sense of what's happening in that part of the play. It is a beautiful piece. I am looking at the Pearl picture at the moment.
Yeah,
it's interesting, and it is an interesting one. But it's sort of you've got the hints of the Medusa head here as well.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And perhaps also the John the Baptist maybe is also at play here, a sort of reversal of John the Baptist, because John the Baptist was killed by a dictator. This is a dictator being killed by the oppressed people rising up against him. And on the page previous, you also have a nod, I think, to George, St. George versus the Dragon.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah.
So there's also, like, that's a lot of, and it's all framed on top of a contemporary map of Scotland.
Yeah,
like it's an actual roadmap.
Yeah,
this is all sitting on. I do wonder if there's a textual significance of the pearls. I don't recall anything in relation to Medusa, but maybe there is something in relation to John the Baptist. But it's not coming up to me.
Maybe it means that I see thee compassed with thy kingdom's pearl, that speak my salutation in their minds. I don't know. I need the footnotes in the translation. Do you think it was anything cut? Now, you seem to think it was the complete text.
Well, I mean, I just the bit with the doorman where he goes on.
Oh my God. Okay, so yeah. I actually made a note of this too.
That typically does not make the cut.
I was shocked that was in there.
He goes on about his brewer's droop for an entire page.
Yeah, and he goes on about how drinking makes you horny, but then you can't get it up. And it's laid out like a lecture, the page, with like the bullet points on a whiteboard almost. I was surprised by the inclusion of the Hecate stuff, because that's often cut because some scholars believe that it was not written by Shakespeare but added later by some. So I was a bit surprised by that. But if you don't have... So there's a point very early on when Macbeth meets the three witches and says, "Say why upon this blasted heath you stop our way with such prophetic greeting." And I'm like, yeah, why did you prophesy this for him? And I think the only explanation is maybe in the Hecate scenes. So it's kind of like, I'm glad they're in there. But I was a bit surprised. I mean, I don't have an opinion one way or the other about whether or not they were written by Shakespeare, but I did think it was interesting that that Briggs thought, oh, this needs to be included. It's part of
It's a stunning sequence as well.
Yeah.
The representation of Hecate is incredible. Yeah.
Oh, and I love the second set of prophecies too, where on stage I don't know how they do the special effects with the floating skull and the baby and those three prophecies that come up, the second round of prophecies. But I mean, the format here was perfect for it. It's just such a perfect, because we've already had a really hallucinatory several hundred pages leading up to it, and it just fits right in when we get to more of it, and you just have to accept it. And there's no question about it this time. The first time it's like, oh, these prophecies really true, and this time it's like, oh yeah, and you see the baby and the skull and all that kind of stuff. So all that stuff worked really well in this, I thought. Yeah.
You also have the image of the baby fetus for the famous exchange between Macduff and Macbeth, where Macbeth is like, well, no man born of woman can harm me, and is like, well, I was from my mother untimely ripped. And as a fellow Caesarean kid, I always remember that line, because I was like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I'm looking at that page now. It's like a photo. There's stuff going on in the background of this page that I don't even know what Briggs has done here. It's really wild. It looks like they've drawn the characters and cut them out and then pasted them onto this other artwork they've done. Yeah, wild.
This reminds me so much of like that exciting aesthetic of the Vertigo comics in the 90s that really seemed to be pushing all this mixed media approach, the very Dave McKean approach. And it was exciting because it was different, and it was clearly aiming for something a little more ambitious, and that sort of got tidied away over the last 30 years. We don't really have that anymore, and this feels like a return to some of that visual excess. Like let's just throw it all on the page.
I would really like to know about the process and how many years this book took to complete. Apparently, Act 1, Scene 1 was like won some award individually.
It was an early project.
Yeah, but then the rest of this must have just been. I just can't imagine the undertaking. One other line I wanted to point out, which is not specific to this version, but the line that, the famous "Life's but a shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more." This time, really reminded me of that Carl Sagan line about the conquerors of a pale blue dot, and really made me think about all of the tyrants of recent years. I mean, it really resonated with me this time, especially, I would not have picked up on a high school, but coming out of the mouth of Macbeth is so like, yeah, you are that guy that's trying to conquer Scotland, and you've murdered all these people and children, and for what? That really hit me this time.
Yeah, the death of young Macduff in particular is very shocking here in terms of the depiction of a death of a child. That's the famous speech that I think tends to get the sonorous presentation.
Yes.
My favorite version of this there's two examples of this, of productions of Macbeth where they've filmed it within a tenement building.
Okay.
And one was in Melbourne with Sam Worthington, I believe.
Okay.
And one was, I want to say it was in Liverpool. And it was a version of Macbeth with Ray Winston. I'm literally Googling this as we speak, folks. Apologies. Macbeth on the Estate. Yes, I remember watching this production. James Frayne played Macbeth. You may know James Frayne is an actor now who you probably seen him playing a villain in some primetime American procedural. Right? That's what he seems to do these days. But he delivered the line with utter disaffection. He was just like utter, like, I am wasted now. I am completely. And he said, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Right. On petty days, day to day. And he's just. I love that delivery and I love that idea, and it's just he's now at the end of his tether. It's like nothing means anything anymore. Like it's completely blasted. He the woods are encircling him, and it's funny as well. My Tolkien radar was pinging a lot because famously the Ents were inspired by the idea of the woods encircling Macbeth.
Oh, right. Okay.
That's where he saw a production of Macbeth as a child, and that sort of planted that idea in his head of trees walking and talking, and then we got Ents. But also there's this repeated juxtaposition of fair and foul. Yeah. It comes up a couple of times, and that's how we first meet Aragorn in Lord of the Rings. There's this idea of, I look foul, but I feel fair to you. There's this idea of he's saying, "Oh, you're saying I'm ugly," but I sort of I like that there's this connection between Tolkien and Shakespeare and Macbeth, like down through the centuries. This language was passed down, and then it sort of implanted itself in young Tolkien's mind, and then we got Lord of the Rings. So yeah, just these little connections, I just was really enjoying.
So my other question, and this is maybe about the text more than the comic, but at the very end, the victorious soldiers talk about Macbeth's fiend-like queen. But did people know? Did the other characters know Lady Macbeth's role?
I think that's
only the guards or the doctor who saw her sleepwalking. Yeah. It was the doctor and someone else saw her sleepwalking, but we don't know that this word of this was spread throughout the land.
Yeah, I feel like that's for the benefit of the audience.
Okay.
I feel like that's the character speaking to the audience attending the play, saying, "Yeah, she's she got what she deserved. There's this sort of finality to that.
Right. Okay.
I am interested in just reading it this time. I started thinking about Macbeth a little bit differently. You just brought up a moment ago contemporary tin pot dictators that we're dealing with. The vulgarity of power and the lust for power, and in the case of Macbeth as well, there's this idea of, Banquo's descendants will become kings.
Yeah.
Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, their child has died. They're not going to have any issue. They're not going to have descendants. So he has to kill Banquo to preserve his sense of power, despite the fact that he's not going to have descendants. So there's something like very jealous about that. There's this idea of power, even when it's self-destructive. I feel as if the witches prophesying to him is meant to introduce a moral compass to a situation that typically hasn't got one. Like the story starts, we already are in a territorial dispute. We already have Duncan having this former ally executed. And he's like, he was a good man. I loved him. He looked at me. He was a trustworthy man, but he sided with the Normans. So like we had to kill him. And it's almost as if that's just the cost of doing business, right? So this is the realpolitik of power is, you take your shot when you get it, and you kill your enemies, and you take power. And the process of Macbeth ascending was probably going to happen anyway, because his star was on the rise.
Yeah.
So it was going to happen. So I feel as if the witches, and maybe the Hecate scene sort of plays into this as well. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, why are you getting involved? Why are you doing this? And you're making of it. So now he's convinced, and that's possibly that. So he needs to feel guilt for something that typically he'd feel no guilt for.
Right.
Murdering children, murdering women, not a problem.
Yeah.
Like that's just what power is about. That's what war is about. But within this schema, within this version of the story, the witches, I'm not saying this adaptation of it, but I'm saying within this narrative, because of the witches involved, he's now thinking, did I do that? Or was I made to do that? Am I trapped by fate? Am I, like his consciousness of what he's done comes to the fore. This is for the benefit of the audience, because they get to go, this is a moral story. Let's all weigh in on Lady Macbeth and Macbeth. But also, I feel like it's a self-reflection on the actual mortal cost of power that typically is not an aspect of powerful men. They do not care.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
They get to not care.
Yeah.
They get to divorce themselves from human feeling. That's why you have power. So you don't think of other people. And it just sort of got me thinking about it in that term. Like the witches are infecting him with guilt.
Yes.
Almost.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The guilt that he and Lady Macbeth also are shown to have in this is so transformative. They're having visions. They're going mad. She's sleepwalking. She's having even before that. She's having these sort of prophetic visions of what she has to do. Yeah, there's something really interesting there.
Yeah, I did find something that's been cut from the play.
Okay, good.
It's the periods at the end of every sentence. Interesting stylistic choice. It actually is more like speaking like Christopher Walken taking all the punctuation out of his scripts. I mean, there's punctuation in there. There's semicolons. I just spotted two periods, but there's a lot of pages. People just speak without an end of the sentence, in a sense.
Well, yeah, it's sort of it actually aids the speech balloon in a way.
Yes.
But then when we have our friend with the brewer's droop, when he's giving his account, because those are text boxes, they're not spoken word balloons. They have periods.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, the airlessness of the speech balloon, you remove the full stop.
Yeah.
That's actually a really nice visual touch.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, it's there once in a while. It's very It's an interesting choice. It's not. I don't know if it's when it's deliberate and when it's if in some pages they're putting there by accident because Briggs forgot to take them out or what. But yeah, it's a wild ride. Yeah, so I would say definitely. I mean, if you know your Macbeth, I mean, this book is very obviously a passion project. Yeah. It's not going to help anybody that's studying Macbeth. I think it's definitely there for people who know it. But I think if you know it and if you're interested in it, I think this is really a wild ride that can be read literally in different ways, and in that you don't really have to read beginning to end, and you can just interpret. There's more room for interpretation. There's additional layers of interpretation.
I really love that point of yours. I really think that's an excellent approach to this comic book. Yeah. Just dip in randomly and then see how the visual representation shifts your understanding of the scene as you understand that scene.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's all I have in my notes. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, or?
No, I think I just wanted to join you in saying that this is a passion project and a bit of an objet d'art all by itself. I think this is a book that should be on your shelf.
Yeah.
Macbeth by K. Briggs is published by Avery Hill. You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. You can comment on any episode there, or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. That's also the address for submitting your own comics work for possible inclusion on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, Emmet and I resume our discussion of Jack Kirby's Commandy. We plan to cover issues 32 through 34. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.